Router planes don't need a whole lot of rehab in general, other than replacing missing parts, et cetera, et cetera. Handles, for example, any of these parts here that you might be missing might be important. One thing they don't need really is to flatten the sole. Really, the sole is just a reference surface. The cutter is doing cutting the final surface and all that. So I wouldn't spend a lot of time on that. What does need a little bit of attention are the cutters themselves. And you can see that this particular cutter here is lapped flat on the bottom, and a cutting edge is cut on the top edge like that. I have often seen these cutters where they put a secondary bevel here because sometimes people think this is the quickest way to a sharp edge is to go ahead and come back this way as well. But that, if you put very much of a bevel on here, that will keep the iron from cutting at all. So first thing to do is lap this flat. Second thing to do is to work on the cutter right here. And that's simple enough to do on a stone like this. In terms of lapping, I'm just going to put my fingers on the flat of the cutter and work it back and forth, keeping a lot of pressure on this front edge here, so I keep it flat right there. Worked across the width of the stone, back and forth, and we'll do this on this, depending on how much material needs to be removed. We might start out at the coarsest stone we need, for example, 200 grit, or a medium stone, water, oil, whatever, and then advance up to a fine honing stone, for example, that hard white Arkansas stone. Once this has been honed and that looks good for us, we can work on the bevel. And because the cutter is angled like this, to get clearance, we need to have the stone sitting on the edge of the bench like that. And again, find the flat, keep your finger right on that flat, and move the cutter back and forth square to the stone. If we angle the cutter like this, we're eventually going to put a skew on the cutter. We don't want that. We want it to cut straight across. So back and forth like this, lots of pressure on the bevel, keeping it flat. And do that. And then, as I mentioned before, progress on to the finer stones until you get a nice edge here. You may feel a burr on this side. I take the burr off with a finer stone and then come back and work the face with a fine stone, et cetera, like that, to get a nice sharp edge right there. The other style of cutter, there's three cutters if you remember, and one of them is just like this but narrower. The other style of cutter is this skew cutter, like so, beveled on both sides on the top. Again, flat on the bottom, but because it has such an odd shape, they made this cutter detachable. So we're going to go ahead and do that. We're going to take this off. And this will make it a little bit easier to hone this cutter. So again, we want to hone the face of it, the bottom edge, and get that flat. So we'll work that on the stone. Work our way up to a fine honing stone. And then we'll come back and work on the bevels. Now there are two bevels here. And again, I like to run my bevel straight up and down the stone. So I'm holding the cutter, you can see at an angle until I find the flat, and it's parallel, this edge is parallel to the stone, and I just run that back and forth, keeping my fingers as flat on the stone as possible and keeping the bevel as flat as possible. So I work that side, and then the same process for the other side, and we'll do this again until we feel a burr back here on the flat side, and we'll take that burr off with a finer stone, come back and work these bevels again with a fine stone. We want a nice sharp edge here. This cutter makes a really nice slicing cut at the bottom of a groove, so it makes a nice shearing cut there and gives a very smooth bottom to a dado or any surface that you might be working on. The reason they they put that together. And notice again that these go together in a certain way. This here is striated with grooves. The seating is striated with grooves. So when they go together, the grooves match up, and that keeps the iron from twisting. If you haven't got it quite tight enough and you're working with it, it won't slip off to one side or the other. Other than that, I think we're pretty much not too much more to deal with on router planes.
This is Joshua Farnsworth. If you're interested in learning traditional woodworking with hand tools, visit my website at woodandshop.com, where you can find free video tutorials, workshop tours of amazing traditional woodworkers, and tool buying guides. You can ask questions and share your projects with thousands of woodworkers on my free traditional woodworking forum. Make sure you subscribe to my regular blog posts, and also check out my 10 steps for getting started in traditional woodworking. Enjoy!